Carol for filling in with me last Wednesday. I listened to the message while I was sitting in McDonald's in somewhere in between Sevierville and Pigeon Forge. Deb was in Merle Norman, and there was no place for me in there. And so I found me a place in McDonald's and drank coffee and listened to Pastor Carol's message, and it was a blessing to me. So thank you, Pastor Carol, for filling in for me. And of course, the Lutons that was here Sunday, I'm so grateful to them. Got to meet them Sunday evening, and they were really a blessing, and look forward to seeing them again. But we started the week before last talking about just, sometimes titles just come to you real clear and everything, but this was just kind of express my heart, kind of like asking the question, can we operate in the supernatural? Is that, if you come across Christians, you just say, what do you think? Do you think we can operate in the supernatural? And I think we'd be surprised how many answers we would get to that. And most likely, more times than not, people would say, well, not like they did, back in the Acts of the Apostles, and not the way that they did some of the things that the Apostle Paul did. But, we read that verse of Scripture that we read and quote so often, in churches and all of our life. Probably if you've been in church most of your life, when in verse 12 of John 14, where Jesus said, "Verily, verily, I say unto you, he that believeth on me, the works that I do, shall he do also, and greater works than these shall he do, because I go unto my Father." And, like I said, I've heard this verse read all of my life, but I've never really heard a minister really take it and just really dissect it and preach on it. Over my lifetime, many years ago, for the most part, when they would read this, it would sound good, but then they had to kind of go on to something else because they didn't really know what to do with this verse. And if you think about it, this verse is telling us that we're supposed to be doing the works that Jesus did when he walked this earth. Now, like I said, when you read it, that sounds real good. But is that all we're supposed to do, is just read it and be blessed by what we just read, or are we supposed to do what he said? But then Jesus, had the gall to say, not just the works that I do, but even greater works shall you do. So, friends, the more I meditated on this, I just came to the conclusion, I'm certain, and I am definitely one of them, but I want to make the necessary changes to get to that place. But I am absolutely certain that if not all, the majority of believers need to get to where they are more sensitive to spiritual things. Because we'll never be able to operate in the realm of the supernatural until we get sensitive to spiritual things. And actually spiritual things are going to have to become more important to us than natural things are. We have to learn by revelation that everything that takes place in the natural that we benefit from, it happens because of what's taking place in the realm of the spirit. So it's not what we do in a natural sense that affects the spiritual, it's what we do in the spiritual that affects the natural. And like I said, most ministers don't really know what to do with this verse, because how do we? I've heard preachers get up, and this is decades ago. I'm talking about when I was really young. But I remember a preacher getting up and say, it would be good if we would just do the works that he's doing. I mean, let's don't even worry about the greater works right now. Let's take one step at a time. Let's at least contemplate doing what he did, And but then again, there's never really any teaching on how to do this, how to appropriate this. But friends, I truly believe that Jesus reveals to us in this verse right here, as to how to operate at the level that he operated in. And some people say, well, we could never do that. But friends, listen, if Jesus says that we're supposed to do his works, and if you look at that again, notice he's the one that's speaking here. And he says, he that believeth on me, the works that I do, shall he do. Now, friends, Jesus is the one that says that we're supposed to do what he's doing. And, I remember Brother Hagin saying this, and boy, he said a lot of things over the years that I studied under him that just branded to my heart. And one of the things that he said one time, and I've used it many, many times. He says, if God asks us to do something, but then he doesn't give us the ability to do it, then we have every right to challenge his justice. In other words, God, how can you ask me to do something, but not give me the ability to do it? But see, friends, doesn't it make sense? We know that God is not going to do that. If Jesus says that we're supposed to do his works, isn't there a way to do them? Even if anybody has never done them, there still has to be a way to do it, because what Jesus said. Now, this is what divides us right here. And, I think a lot of times the messages that I preach here, and how that I couldn't go hardly any other places and preach it, because I know as well as I know my name. I preached outside of Word churches for several years after I stopped pastoring, and I preached in a lot of country churches and most of them denominational. And every message that I got, I had to go back and water it down considerably. You're talking about watering Kool-Aid down. I watered it down to where there wasn't any flavor left. And but I couldn't give it to them the way that it was in my heart, because I knew if anything else, if some of them would just make them mad, they wouldn't understand it, but they would think they would accuse me of saying something that I really didn't say, because they're thinking naturally when I'm speaking on a higher level, in the realm of the spirit, and but that's what we've done. But everything that Jesus did, and this, we read some verses last week or week before last, and I'm not going to do that again, but I will give you those verses, and we'll put them on the overhead. But, Jesus said everything that he did, and this is the key right here to how we operate in the realm of the supernatural. Jesus said more than once, actually, I have 5 verses where he said that he never said anything and he never did anything except what the Father told him to do and what he saw the Father do. And see, a lot of times we think Jesus just went around and when we read of something Jesus said, we thought Jesus just said it, just blurted it out. But friends, he didn't do that. He never just blurted something out. If something came to his mind, which I am absolutely sure that it did from time to time, because he was a man. He did come to earth as a man. So that means, we know that he was tempted in all points as we are, so we know thoughts came into his mind that he had to reject. He was tempted in everything that you and I are tempted, and that in itself sometimes is hard to understand or really think that those things happened to Jesus. But when Jesus had a thought of maybe, doing something, he didn't just act on that. And see, you can find out, he spent a lot of time. He pulled away from his disciples many times. He pulled away from the multitude many times to do what? Pray, spend time with the Father, to hear what he was saying, and to operate and act when he said to act. And I've given the example many times, and I think I did the week before last, is when they first came to him and told him that Lazarus had died. Well, he wasn't in that city, but he waited 2 days before he went. And Lazarus was as close to him as anybody on the planet was. They were that was kind of Jesus's go-to place. When Paul talks about going to his own company, this is kind of where Jesus, when Jesus wanted a place to relax and just be around people that he loved and loved him back and had a rapport with, but he loved to be around Lazarus and Mary and Martha. And but he didn't go there for 2 days, and they were, it's like, well, shouldn't we go? And then they tried to say, well, we don't need to go back there. You remember what happened the last time? They might kill you if you go back there. You think Jesus was concerned about that? All he did is listen to the Father. He went when the Father said to go. And friends, the Lord showed this to me many years ago, how that when he stood before that tomb, Jesus didn't just think it up and say, well, it'll sound good to say Lazarus come forth. No, friends, he saw the Father do that long before he ever got there. He saw that. He saw the Father calling him forth. So he just acted what he saw. But little Darlene, you can put these on the screen so we don't have to take the time to turn to them. But you can notice right here in John chapter 5 and verse 30, Notice Jesus says, I can of mine own self do nothing. As I hear, I judge. And my judgment is just, because I seek not mine own will, but the will of the Father which has sent me. Look at 6 and 38. All these verses are in John. Jesus said, for I came down from heaven not to do mine own will, but the will of him that sent me. John chapter 8, verses 26 through 29. Jesus said, I have many things to say and to judge of you, but he that sent me is true, and I speak to the world those things which I have heard of him. Verse 27, they understood not that he spake to them of the Father. Verse 28, then said Jesus unto them, when you have lifted up the Son of Man, then shall ye know that I am he, and that I do nothing, hear that? I do nothing of myself, but as the Father hath taught me, I speak these things. What things? The things that the Father teaches him. And that's all that he would go around saying. Look at John chapter 12, verses 49 and 50. Jesus said, for I have not spoken of myself, but the Father which sent me, he gave me a commandment, what I should say and what I should speak. And verse 50, and I know that this commandment is life everlasting. Whatsoever I speak, therefore, even as the Father said unto me, so I speak. And one last verse in John 14, right here where we are, verses 10 and 11. Jesus said, believest thou not that I am in the Father, and the Father in me? The words that I speak unto you, I speak not of myself, but the Father that dwelleth in me, he doeth the works. So say, friends, even the things that Jesus did, let's go ahead and read that. 11, believe me that I am in the Father and the Father in me, or else believe me for the very work's sake. But friends, even the works that Jesus did, when he called Lazarus forth, when he laid hands on the blind, when he raised the cripples and ministered healing to all these, everybody looks and says, what a wonderful thing that Jesus did. But friends, what Jesus is saying, I'm just doing what the Father told me to do. He's the one doing the works. See, doesn't it take a little bit of responsibility off of our backs to know that to operate in the supernatural, all we really have to do is say what he tells us to say, do what he tells us to do, and then the responsibility for it manifesting is not up to you and me. It's up to the Father. Now, see, this is where everybody says, well, when you talk about operating in the supernatural, well, you're leaving me out. That's what most Christians are going to think. Well, you're leaving me out. And you know why they say that? They said, I can't imagine me operating in the supernatural. Well, friends, God can't imagine us really doing anything in the supernatural himself. That's why we just submit to him, and we get sensitive to the Spirit where we say what he tells us to say, and then we do what he tells us to do. And when we do that, then we can sit back and relax, knowing that he's going to do the work. Friends, if the work was our responsibility, then we'd have every reason in the world to be stressed out about ministry. But see, this is why pastors burn out. Pastors burn out because they're trying to do everything themselves. God never asked us to do that. Just that simple verse, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Notice it doesn't say I can do all things. He says I can do all things through Christ. If you don't have Christ to strengthen you, you won't be able to do anything, much less all things. But if we allow him to work through us, then there are no limitations whatsoever, and we can do whatever is necessary and needed at the moment. Even if it's raising the dead, every one of us can lay our hands or speak to a corpse and expect that corpse to come alive if God has spoke that into our hearts and said, I want you to do that. And then we're going to get all these thoughts in our heads. Well, shouldn't it be so-and-so? Shouldn't it be so-and-so? But if he speaks to you about that, then you don't have to be concerned. Well, I can't raise the dead, nor can anybody else. But you can be obedient to the voice of God. And when he tells you to act, then you go over and you lay hands. It won't be you raising that person from the dead. It will be God doing the work. See? So see, this takes the responsibility off of us. And pastors, like I said, pastors should never, that is one area of business, if you want to call it that in this world, the call of God on people's lives. I know people get tired, you need to retire, but I'm telling you, people called to the fivefold ministry really technically should never retire. They can slow down. They can be removed. They can step down from an office. But these two over here, they're never going to retire. I didn't have to go and beg her to preach for last Wednesday night because I knew she hasn't retired. See? And 15 years from now, if I'm on vacation somewhere, I'm still going to be able to say to her, and or to Pastor Orman, would y'all fill in for me while I'm gone? I don't have to, well, I wonder if they burned out by now. No, we don't burn out. We don't burn out because we're not doing these things on our own. See? Hallelujah. So you notice those verses there. That's how we operate in the supernatural. Let's look over to Proverbs chapter 4 real quick. Proverbs chapter 4. Proverbs 4. Verse 20, he says, my son, attend to my words, incline thine ear unto my sayings. Let them not depart from thine eyes. Keep them in the midst of thine heart, for they are life unto those that find them, and health to all their flesh. Keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Put away from thee a froward mouth, and perverse lips put far from thee. Let not thine eyes, or let thine eyes look right on, and let thine eyelids look straight before thee. Ponder the path of thy feet, and let all thy ways be established. Turn not to the right hand, nor to the left. Remove thy foot from evil. Now I want you to notice, first of all, verse 23 right here, where he says, keep thy heart with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. Now the Amplified Translation says, or the Amplified Classic says, keep and guard your heart. Listen to those words. Keep and guard your heart. Friends, when you're guarding something, you're guarding it for the purpose of keeping something else from coming in and causing harm to that, whether it is an object or whether it is an individual. And you know, friends, I can remember, just like all of you can that have small children now, when my children were real small, when we went places and like that, you know, I really wasn't paying attention to much of anything else that was going on. I always knew where my girls were. You know, I always knew that about them, and that's where my focus was, because, you know, I was guarding them, you know. And but he says right here to keep and guard your heart with all diligence. And then he says, above all that you guard. I mean, of all the things that you think are important that you need to be guarding, above all of these things, guard your heart. Now, let me tell you what he's really saying to us here. Now, friends, we know that the word spirit and heart are words that can be used interchangeably. That is the part of us that was born again. That's where the life and the nature of God is. We're perfect in that respect because of the life and the nature of God. Talking about our spirits, not our mind and our bodies. Those are imperfections. But our spirit, man, all it knows to do is seek after God. It has its nature. So what we're actually talking about here is what you're guarding. You're guarding your heart so that you will stay sensitive to spiritual things. Now, I know this is comical, but Brother Hagin also said something one time that I've never forgotten. He said, what is so sad? He said, because in so many churches around the world, they're so insensitive to spiritual things that the Holy Spirit could walk down the main aisle of the church with a red hat on, and nobody would notice it. And you know, he never laughed when he said that. I heard him say it more than once. He never laughed because the Lord showed him that is what he's trying to say. And even, you know, things, God can do things to attract our attention, shaking bells and wearing loud colors and stuff like that. Friends, there are some people, they're not going to sense it. They're not going to hear it. They're not going to see it no matter what. And you know why? Because they're so dull. Their spirits are dull. It's like a conscience that's been seared. And once your conscience gets seared, then things don't bother you anymore. your conscience doesn't bother you when you do something wrong, like whereas before all of your life, everything you did, whether it was taking a penny from somebody or stealing something large or committing adultery or anything like that, whatever it was, small or large, you are convicted of that sin. But you can get to the place that you are so dull that you won't be convicted of it anymore. And that's pretty much when you've been turned over, or you've got a reprobate mind. You've gone to a place that you can't really be convicted anymore. And there is not a more dangerous place in life than that right there. Because, friends, our conscience, that is the voice of our spirit speaking to us. That's what our conscience is. We can follow that conscience as long as we're born again, because we have his life and nature and living within us. If we're not born again, you can't follow your conscience. It's not a safe guide. But it is, if we're born again. But he's talking about sensitivity here. We have to protect our heart from anything that will defile it. And that's what he tells us in verse 23. Watch immediately what he says in verse 24. Put away from thee a froward mouth, and perverse lips put far from you. Isn't it odd, in a sense, that he talks about guarding your heart from anything that would desensitize it or make it insensitive? But then immediately he talks about putting away a froward mouth. It's speaking in an adverse way. It's speaking doubt and unbelief. A lot of people would read this and think it's just talking about cursing and things like that. Friends, speaking doubt, fear, and unbelief over your life is probably going to hurt you a lot more than cursing will. That's what we're talking about here. But let me say this to you right here. Guarding your heart. And I'm going to, there's just not enough teaching on this anymore. There's not enough preaching on this anymore. It's almost like something that's just, it's like, well, we've got beyond that. But I'm going to tell you what guarding your heart demands. It still demands a holy life. And think about it. You don't hardly ever hear sermons very often where we talk about, say, man, we need to get back to a holy life. And the reason we don't do that is because, see, what we're doing more than anything else in the church now is compromising. We're compromising with everything in the world because they say, well, everybody's doing it. See, there's all these things we're doing out in the world. Well, everything that's going on in the world will eventually find its way in the church if we allow it, see. And the way we allow it is by compromising with it. We say, well, I guess, times have changed, and could say a lot there. But friends, we have to be mindful to guarding our heart so that we'll be sensitive. We have to be mindful of what we say. You can't just say anything. You can't talk a bunch of garbage and then expect the spiritual things of God to respond to you just like that. You can't do that, see? And when I say you, I'm talking about me and you. I'm talking about all of us. We have to be mindful of what we say. We have to be mindful of where we go. See, we can't just go anywhere. I think I've told you this before, but Bishop Keith Butler said one time, he said, Christians, it's one thing you need to get in your head. He says, you can't do everything that this world does. You just can't do it. He says, you can't play the game that they play and expect to receive all that and still want all that you want from God. You want and see, there's such a trueness to that. There's so many believers, they truly, truly want the things of God. They just can't seem to let go. They can't seem to let go of the clutches of this world. Well, see, we have to be careful where we go. We can't just do anything. Deb and I were gone for a week, and we were in the mountains and we didn't see anybody that we knew, usually many times we have. We, in a sense, if we wanted to, we could have gone places that we normally may not have gone if we was here in Columbia. We could have lived a different life over there. But friends, listen, it doesn't matter where we go. We're supposed to be living a holy life pleasing unto God, regardless of whether we're in our hometown or if we're on the other side of the world. That we ought to be living the same way. We have to be mindful of what we see. We can't watch just anything on television. You can't just watch garbage all the time on television and expect to be growing spiritually and expect to be sensitive to spiritual things. You can't watch extreme violence. You can't watch extreme anything that is worldly that we know is wrong. You can't watch that stuff on a regular basis and come in here and expect for the Spirit of God to speak to you and to you to respond to Him the way you should. It's not going to ever work. It's never going to work. It goes back to what Kathy said sometime back when she and I and Nancy were talking out there, and it was what I was preaching on, and she said the Lord, she was meditating on that, and she just said a lot of this. I wonder if I'm willing, talking about herself, I wonder if I'm willing to pay the cost. And see, friends, that's the difference between, that's what separates that, the saying, that's what separates the men from the boys. Christians can talk a good fight. They can talk a good life. They can talk all this good. But friends, you have to eventually walk it out. Talking only goes so far. Lisa and I was talking about that today. Words are cheap. You can talk and talk and talk and talk and talk and say nothing. There's got to be some actions eventually back up those words for there to ever be anything to it. We're to guard our heart at all times, not just when we're in church. And that's what I was just sharing right there. Look at verse 25. I want to look at this one more time. He says, put away from thee a froward mouth. That's 24. Verse 25, let thine eyes look right on. Let thine eyelids look straight before thee. Ponder the path of thy feet, and let all thy ways be established. Turn not to the right hand, nor to the left. Remove thy foot from evil. Friends, in other words, he's saying, always know which direction your life is going. Keep your eyes ahead. Don't be looking over here to the world. Don't be looking over here to the world. Don't be looking at all these things that are trying to grab, that are vying for your attention. Their intentions are not good. Keep your eyes on God. Keep your feet walking towards Him. Keep all of your energies and efforts going towards Him. Keep your eyes on these things. See, He's asking for all of our focus. He's asking for all of our focus, because if we do so, see, then we're going to be sensitive to Him, and we're going to be able to do what He tells us to do and operate at that level. Now look with me, and I'm going a little fast here because I want to get to a certain place. Look over to Proverbs 23 real quick. Proverbs 23. The first part of this verse says, for as he thinketh in his heart, so is he. Now, I know we all know that verse, and we usually quote that this way: as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. As a woman thinketh in her heart, so is she. So, in other words, whatever we put in our heart through our thought life. And friends, I'm going to tell you something. Your thought life is extremely important. What we put in our heart through our thought life is what we're going to become and remain. That's what we're going to become and remain. That's why we have to demand that our thoughts stay in line with our recreated spirit. Your thoughts have to stay in line with that. Your thoughts are going to want to wander. There's going to be thoughts come into your head, and you know they're not godly. And you look back and say, where did that come from? And it's like we've said so often, friends, we're not responsible for the thoughts that come into our head. It's what we do with them when they get there. If we entertain those thoughts and they end up hurting us, then we only have ourselves to blame. We know what we're supposed to do when these evil things come into our mind. We know what we're supposed to do. Let's close with Romans chapter 12. Bless the Lord. I started to just quote this verse because I know we all know it. But verses 1 and 2 primarily, Paul says to the church at Rome, I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And then he says, be not conformed to this world. Friends, those words right there, is enough to meditate on right there for 6 months. If every believer would meditate on these words, be not conformed to this world. Think about that just for a moment. Think about how powerful. Forget about the rest of that verse for just a moment and think about how far we're going to advance in our life with God if we just break conformity to this world. And here is the Spirit of God through the Apostle Paul saying, do not be conformed to this world. And there's only one way to do this. There's only one way to break that. And he goes on and tells us, he says, instead of being conformed to this world, he says, be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and the perfect will of God. How do you find the perfect will of God? How do you find out what's acceptable to God? Your mind absolutely must be renewed. Not reborn, but renewed. And the Word is the only thing that does this. I have this thought that comes to me every single time I read this verse right here. And you know, different things stick out to people in different ways. But every time I read this, I think about all of the verses in the Bible. And so many of them, all of them are extremely important. But you know, there are verses of Scripture that have meant so much to us over the years, and they may not have meant that much to others, but boy, they've just blessed us. But when I read this right here, this second verse primarily, I think about how could any other verse, other than the Scriptures that tell us how to be born again, how can there be a more important verse in all of the Bible? Because friends, until our minds are renewed, we're going nowhere. Nowhere. It is absolutely imperative that we think in a different way than this world thinks. When adversity comes, if our mind's not renewed, we're going to crash and crumble just like they do. When we get bad news, if our mind's not renewed, then we're going to do the same thing that everybody else does. They're going to fall apart. But if your mind is renewed, then it will accept the truth that you've put in your heart. It will not only accept that truth, it will agree with it. And then you'll speak that out of your mouth. Here's the problem with the church. Because our minds so much of the time have not been renewed, our minds are teaming up with our body and overcoming our spirit. Did y'all get that? This is what has to happen. Our minds have to be renewed so that our mind teams up with our spirit and totally controls this body. That's why Paul says, I keep under my body. He never prayed, oh God, help me. Help me, Lord, keep my body under. He said, no, I do it. I do it. But the only way he could say that is because his mind had been renewed and it was agreeing with the truth that he knew in his heart. So then he could speak out the truth that he knew in his heart because his mind wasn't arguing with him anymore. Friends, I could run this church 15 times on that right there. That is so exciting to me. So exciting. That's what's changed my life. That's what's changed my life. It's enabled me to think differently. I don't have to think, if you get bad news, that's not the end of the world because your Father is still at work in your life. These things that Steve talked about, he mentioned this Monday night in Monday night prayer, and we prayed about this. And, and they were kind of not discouraged so much, but it's like, well, what we're wanting to do, everything we're wanting to do is coming against us. Now, this is where they were Monday. It's like, now, but see, you don't just say, well, it just ain't going to work. We're not going to be able to do it. It's just not going to work. No, friends, his mind's been renewed. So his mind was agreeing with the word that was in his heart. So they kept speaking the truth. So that means things began to work. So policies and rules started changing. Things just, favor began to work. And here he is giving a testimony tonight that he found favor every door he opened. And see, this should not be isolated things. This is the way it should work for believers all the time. But our minds absolutely have to be renewed. This is so vital. And this is the only way that we're going to be able to keep our thought life in line and in submission to our spirit. Well, I really hate to quit. But we're going to start next week. We're not going to go over this here. We're going to go into another area. And I'm just going to be honest with you, friend. This is just